Have you ever stopped and asked yourself, who are you when you're not being useful, not needed, not fixing something, not helping, not saving someone from their own collapse? Who are you without the tasks, the favors, the constant performance of value? If that question makes you uncomfortable, you're not alone. Because for so many people, especially the ones who always show up, always care, always put others before themselves, usefulness has become their identity, their worth, their safety net, their mask. But here's the uncomfortable truth no one talks about. The need to be useful is often a trauma response, wearing the costume of virtue. You think you're strong, selfless, reliable. But deep down, something else is happening. You're surviving by staying needed. And in the process, you're disappearing. From the outside, you look like the one who has it together, the go-to, the rock, the one who always helps. But what people don't see is what it costs you to keep playing that role. The exhaustion, the resentment, the silent scream inside your chest that says, when is it my turn? But you don't let it out because you've been trained, not taught, trained, to believe that love must be earned, that care must be traded for value, that if you're not giving something, you're taking up space. So now, you show up even when you're empty. You listen even when no one listens to you. You fix what's broken even when you're the one bleeding. And you call it kindness. You call it responsibility. You call it love. But let's be real. Sometimes it's just fear. Fear of being left out. Fear of being replaced. Fear of being seen as selfish, lazy, unworthy. Somewhere along the way, you internalized this brutal equation. If I am not useful, I am nothing. Where did that belief come from? Maybe it was a parent who only noticed you when you performed. Maybe it was a childhood where love had conditions. Maybe it was a relationship where your needs didn't matter, only your service. Wherever it started, the result is the same. You became hyper-functional, emotionally over-responsible, the fixer, the peacekeeper, the one who steps in when everyone else falls apart, and the world applauds you for it. They call you strong, noble, admirable. But they don't see the quiet truth. You're exhausted, you're invisible, and worst of all, you don't know who you are without someone else to save. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." But how can you accept yourself if you've never met the parts of you that don't perform, that don't serve a purpose, that just exist? When was the last time you did something without asking, is this productive? When was the last time you said no? Not because you were busy, but because you simply didn't want to say yes. If that sounds selfish to you, it's because you've been conditioned to believe your time, your energy, your life is not yours, that it belongs to everyone else first. But let me ask you something you probably never hear. Who takes care of you while you're busy taking care of everyone else? Because here's the cruel irony. The more useful you are, the more people come to expect it. The more you give, the more they take. And not because they're cruel, but because you've trained them to rely on you. You've taught them that your needs don't come first, that your boundaries are flexible, that you will always be there no matter what. But what happens when you're not? When you finally say, not today? When you stop answering every call? When you disappear from the role you've been performing for years? Suddenly, you're not the hero anymore. You're changed. You're cold. You're not like you used to be. No, you're just tired, and you're finally starting to realize that being useful is not the same as being loved. Being helpful is not the same as being whole. The tragedy is, most people don't notice the cost until it's too late, until their nervous system crashes, until the burnout turns into illness, until the anger they've swallowed for years turns into silence, or worse, self-hatred. But the signs were always there. The inner child who never felt safe unless they were pleasing. The adult who can't sit still unless they're fixing something. The person who panics in stillness because rest feels like failure. You don't need more motivation. You need permission. Permission to stop, permission to be messy, permission to be unproductive, to be undeserving by society's standards, and still worthy of care. You're not a tool, you're not a product, You're not a role to play in someone else's life. But you've forgotten that, haven't you? That's what happens when usefulness becomes your identity. You shrink yourself down to function. You erase the parts that don't serve, and in doing so, you abandon the one person you were never supposed to lose, yourself. And here's the scariest part. One day, the people who needed you will find someone else, someone newer, more convenient, less tired. And what will you be left with then? That's where the unraveling begins. That's where the mask starts to crack. And that's what we'll talk about next. What happens when you stop being the useful one and start becoming real? So, what happens when you finally stop? When you don't return the message? When you don't show up? When you let the emergency pass without offering yourself as the solution? At first, it's quiet. Then it gets loud. Really loud. The world around you, the one you held up like scaffolding, starts to shake. People notice. They call, not to ask if you're okay, but to ask what's wrong, why you're being distant, why you're not yourself. But what they're really saying is, why aren't you being useful to me anymore? That's the moment it hits you. You were never fully seen. You were valued for what you did, not for who you are. And the moment you stop doing, the moment you stop carrying the weight for everyone else, you also stop being essential to them. It's brutal, but it's honest. You start to see the transactions for what they were. The friendships built on favors, the relationships built on sacrifice, the admiration built on self-abandonment. You start to ask questions you've avoided your whole life. If I'm not the helper, the fixer, the healer, then who am I? What do I need? What do I want? And here's where the emptiness creeps in, because when you've lived your whole life for others, there's often nothing left for you. No hobbies, no rest, no identity that exists outside of performance. You realize that you've built an entire personality around being irreplaceable. And it worked. Until it didn't. Until the moment you burned out, broke down, or just couldn't anymore. And what's terrifying isn't that others don't understand. It's that you don't either. You feel guilty. You feel lost. You feel lazy for not constantly producing. That's the curse of internalized usefulness. It doesn't let you rest. Even when your body screams, even when your soul begs, you mistake stillness for selfishness. You mistake peace for failure, because you were raised in an emotional economy where only the productive deserve to exist. And now you're here, trying to heal, trying to breathe, but everything in your nervous system tells you you're doing something wrong. You see, this isn't just psychological, it's biological. Your body has been in fight or flight for years, addicted to urgency, addicted to the adrenaline of being needed, of being the one who knows what to do, being the one people turn to. But when the emergencies stop, and they will, your system crashes. You start to feel what you've been running from. Loneliness, not the kind that comes from being alone, the kind that comes from being surrounded, but unknown. Because the more useful you became, the more invisible you were. And now, with the spotlight gone, the silence feels unbearable. But don't run from it, because this is where the healing begins. This is where you begin to face the truth that Carl Jung understood so clearly. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. This is not your fate. Being needed is not the same as being loved. Being useful is not the same as being safe. But your unconscious doesn't know that yet. It still believes that your place in this world is conditional, that if you're not providing something, you're disposable. That's the belief we must confront, not with logic, with presence, with compassion. You're not broken for feeling this way. You're not weak for wanting rest. You're not selfish for needing care. You are just a human being who forgot that their worth is intrinsic, not earned. And now, the work begins. To unlearn the reflex, to stop jumping at every request, to breathe before you say yes, to ask yourself, is this mine to carry? And be okay with the answer being no. People will not applaud you for this. They'll say you're changing. They'll say you're colder now. They'll say they miss the old you, but the old you was never whole. It was a survival version, a performance, a distorted adaptation to a world that told you, don't be a burden, be a solution. And you were. You became exactly what they needed, and nothing that you needed. But not anymore. You are not here to be anyone's emotional infrastructure. You are not here to be a permanent yes. You are here to become real. And real people disappoint. Real people say no. Real people stop performing. And when you do, when you stop feeding the machine of usefulness, you'll see what's left. Some people will walk. Some connections will collapse. But that's not loss. That's revelation. Because anyone who loved your usefulness more than your presence was never truly loving you. Let them go. What comes next is not comfort. It's confrontation with the parts of you that have been silenced by service, shamed for resting, punished for wanting something back. That's what we'll walk into next. The battle that starts when you stop being who the world wanted and start reclaiming who you really are. There comes a point where the mask no longer fits, not because it fell off, but because you finally outgrew it. You wake up one day and realize the person everyone loves isn't even you. It's the version of you they trained to serve them. The agreeable one. The one who fixes, adjusts, sacrifices. The one who makes sure no one ever feels abandoned. Except you. You weren't building relationships. You were building systems of dependency. You weren't creating connection. You were creating emotional contracts where your value depended on what you could offer. And now that you've stopped, now that you've begun to withdraw, the cracks are showing. You start to see just how one-sided it all was. Not because people are evil, but because they got used to a version of you that didn't ask for anything back, that didn't take up space, that didn't have preferences or off days or boundaries. You taught them that your love came without limits. And now, your limits feel like betrayal. That's the burden of waking up. You don't just grieve the loss of others, you grieve the loss of your old self, the one who said yes to survive, the one who stayed silent to be safe, the one who became useful because they didn't believe they were enough without it. You may hate that version of yourself at first. You'll call them naive, desperate, weak. But be careful. That version of you is trying to keep you alive in a world that only praised your productivity and punished your needs. That version of you was a warrior in disguise. Don't shame them. Thank them, and then let them rest. Because now it's your turn to stop negotiating your worth, to stop proving you matter, to stop handing out pieces of your soul just to be tolerated. And that's when it happens, the void. You've stopped performing. But you haven't yet redefined who you are. You've said no to what you were, but haven't yet said yes to what you're becoming. This space is terrifying. It's lonely, and it's necessary. Carl Jung said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And this is the pain he meant. The pain of sitting in the empty room after you've cleared out all the furniture that never belonged to you. No distractions, no applause, no urgent crisis to solve. Just you. And at first, that doesn't feel like enough. You'll reach for old habits. The urge to be needed will creep back in like a phantom limb. You'll want to help someone, answer a call, say yes. Not because it feels right, but because it feels familiar. But don't sit in the discomfort. Because this is where you begin to feel things you've numbed for years, sadness you never cried out, anger you swallowed to keep the peace, dreams you buried because they didn't serve anyone else. It hurts, but it's real. And in that realness, something quiet starts to return. A voice, not loud, not demanding, but present. And it says, "This is who I am, even when I'm not performing." At first it's shaky, it doubts itself, it needs reassurance. But over time it gets stronger, clearer, braver. And then something wild happens. You stop needing to be useful, not because you've become indifferent, but because you've become whole. You realize you can love without overextending. You can give without disappearing. You can help without losing your center. Because the truth is, your worth was never tied to your utility. It was always there. You just couldn't feel it through the noise of your people-pleasing. Now you get to rebuild, not from desperation, not from fear, but from freedom. And not everyone will like this new you, Some people will drift, some will lash out, some will accuse you of being selfish, cold, distant. But that says nothing about you and everything about the dynamic they depended on, because your usefulness was never neutral. It was a transaction. And now the transaction has ended. The ones who stay, really stay, will be the ones who don't need to be saved by you, who don't measure your love by how much you bleed for them, who can sit with you in your silence, in your softness, in your full humanity. And those people, they are rare, but they are real. That's what awaits on the other side of this process. Not just rest, but resonance. Not just peace, but presence. But first, you must burn it down, the performance, the addiction to being needed, the identity built on self-erasure. Burn it, and in the ashes, you'll find something you haven't touched in years, yourself. But before you rebuild, there's one more storm to pass through, one last ghost to confront, the most dangerous one of all, the guilt of finally choosing you. And that's what we'll walk into next. The emotional warfare that begins the moment you start prioritizing yourself, and why you must learn to survive it without apology. At first, the guilt doesn't shout. It whispers, "You've changed. You're selfish now. You're not the person I used to know." And you start to wonder, what if they're right? What if you have become cold? What if, in trying to heal, you've gone too far? That's the trick of guilt. It doesn't attack you head on. It disguises itself as morality, as responsibility, as love. But it's not love. It's the ghost of your old conditioning, clinging to you like wet clothes, trying to pull you back into the role it spent years perfecting, the role of the one who never says no, the one who carries weight without complaint, the one who disappears behind other people's needs. And now that you've stepped away from that role, the system doesn't know what to do with you. So it punishes you with guilt. But hear this, feeling guilty doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It often means you're doing something different. And when you've built your identity on self-sacrifice, even basic self-respect feels rebellious. Even rest feels defiant. Even saying, "I need space," feels like you're committing emotional treason. That's not guilt, that's detox. You're not abandoning others, you're returning to yourself. But not everyone will see it that way. People who benefited from your overgiving will call your boundaries attacks. People who fed off your availability will treat your silence like betrayal. People who never once asked, "Are you okay?" will suddenly ask, "Why are you so distant?" Don't mistake noise for truth. This is the backlash of liberation. It's predictable, it's painful, and it means you're on the right track. Because if you were still performing, they wouldn't notice. They'd keep consuming your energy like it was free. They'd keep expecting you to show up, smile, serve, fix, as if you didn't have a self, only a function. But you're not a function. You're a human being. And human beings get to choose. They get to change. They get to rest. Let that sink in. You are allowed to exist without justification. You don't need to earn your space. You don't need to earn your rest. You don't need to earn your worth. You were never meant to be available 24/7 for other people's emotional emergencies. You were never meant to be on call for validation, reassurance, or convenience. You were meant to feel your own feelings, to follow your own rhythm, to live a life that doesn't revolve around being someone else's safety net. And yes, it will feel unnatural at first, because survival patterns always do. You will want to go back. You will crave the familiar script. You will miss the applause, the gratitude, the identity of being the one who holds it all together. But ask yourself, who held you? Who helped you when you broke down? Who showed up when you couldn't show up? Who reminded you that you matter even when you're not useful? If the answer is no one, then maybe it's time to become that person for yourself. Because here's the deepest truth of all. The need to be useful was never about love. It was about fear. Fear of being forgotten, fear of being left behind, fear of being seen in your full, raw, unmet, messy humanity, and not being chosen. So you performed. You overgave. You disappeared into your usefulness. But now you're done. You've grieved the old version of you. You've endured the silence that comes after the performance ends. You've stood in the emptiness and felt the shaking in your bones, and now you're still here. That's the rebirth, not a dramatic transformation, not fireworks. Just this. You're still here, and you no longer owe the world your constant sacrifice. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to fix anyone. You don't need to explain why you've chosen yourself. Let them be confused. Let them misunderstand. Let them walk. Because the ones who stay, the ones who meet you here without asking for the old performance, those are the ones who see you now. The real you, not the useful one. The whole one. And that's the life you're allowed to build now. Not from urgency, not from fear, not from debt, but from truth, from peace, from stillness, from knowing, finally, fully, fiercely, I do not need to be useful to be worthy. And that is where your life truly begins.